Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the First Minister of Scotland, the Right Honourable Nicola Sturgeon, MSP.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. Good morning to everyone here. It is absolutely fantastic to welcome everybody here this morning. To those of you from outside Scotland, welcome to Scotland, welcome to Glasgow, to everybody, and in particular, and perhaps most importantly, welcome to the south side of Glasgow, my own constituency, which, as you've probably discovered in the time you've been here, is the centre of the universe and the true capital of the world. Glasgow certainly feels like the capital of the world over this week. I'm really thrilled to be here this morning, albeit briefly. As Charlie said, unfortunately, I'm not able to stay with you for the whole event, and sadly not for the Q&A session. But in case you think I'm dodging questions, I'm not. I have to be in Parliament to take First Minister's questions, so I'll be getting interrogated, but perhaps not as expertly as I would be here, was I able to stay. Look, it's great to welcome you here, but particularly to this location. This location really does have a very distinguished history. The South Rotunda, along with its twin on the other side of the river, it was built more than a century ago, and it was constructed to allow people and goods to travel between Govan and Finnieston. At that time, of course, this city of Glasgow was a driving force, perhaps the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution. In fact, 100 years or so ago, if you had been looking up or down the River Clyde, you would have seen perhaps around a fifth of the world's shipping tonnage being built here on the Clyde. So this setting is, without a shadow of a doubt, a reminder of Scotland's immense capacity for innovation. But it's also a really powerful reminder of our responsibilities, because as an industrial nation, Scotland has benefited for generations now from the carbon emissions that are now causing climate change. These emissions for us have generated the prosperity that we have enjoyed now for a long, long time. And so they have created an obligation for us, in common with other developed nations, to take a lead and to show real drive and responsibility when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. And Scotland is certainly seeking to do that. At this COP26 summit, we are, with others of course, arguing strongly for a settlement and an outcome to the discussions that are taking place here that will see real decisive progress towards limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, which all of the science now tells us is essential to preventing climate catastrophe. We're also arguing strongly for fair financing for developing nations and highlighting really important issues that have not had sufficient priority so far, issues like loss and damage, how we start to make up for the loss, the damage that many vulnerable communities across the world are already experiencing from climate change. And of course, we're seeking to provide forums where people who are not at the negotiating table across the river can nevertheless make their voices heard. And we're also trying to show leadership through the power of our example. And on that, while I would not stand here and suggest for a single second that Scotland, like countries everywhere, does not have more to do to really reflect the urgency and the importance of the climate emergency, I do think it is the case that Scotland can claim to be showing leadership and therefore have credibility, real credibility, in urging others to do likewise. Since 1990, Scotland has reduced our own greenhouse gas emissions by more than 50%. That means we are already, as a nation, halfway to that goal of net zero. We have set very ambitious and very tough targets to get ourselves the other half of the way to net zero. So by 2030, which is not a long way off in the distance, we have committed ourselves to reducing carbon emissions by 75% and then to reaching that goal of net zero by 2045. And we are embracing some hard choices and facing up to some tough decisions along the way. And of course, many of these tough decisions do relate very centrally to the energy sector. For example, and this is not easy for a country like Scotland, we have accepted as government here in Scotland that the continued unlimited recovery of hydrocarbons is not consistent with our climate obligations. It's not consistent with meeting the aims of the Paris Agreement. So our focus now is and must be on a just and fair transition for that sector. And we're also looking to seize opportunities. And again, so many of these are in the energy sector. And there is no doubt at all, that some of the most important, biggest opportunities relate to offshore wind, a technology which, as Charlie has already reflected on this morning, is of particular importance to Scotland and, of course, of growing importance around the world. Scotland's aim is to have the offshore wind capacity by 2030 to generate 11 gigawatts of electricity each year. That's enough, to put that in context, to power more than 8 million homes. Now, that target is ambitious. I don't think there is any two ways of looking at it. But, and this is the important point, with the right action, the right focus, the right will, that target is eminently achievable. And even more importantly, it is an essential target for us to meet our own climate targets and secure that just transition away from fossil fuels. So today I want to highlight three key reasons in particular why I believe this ambition is achievable and deliverable, and why Scotland provides such excellent opportunities for offshore wind development. Firstly, and of course most importantly and obviously, Scotland has some of the best offshore wind resources anywhere in Europe. It's been estimated that the wind energy from deep water sites purely in the North Sea could exceed the EU's electricity requirements 4 times over. And Scotland, of course, has a very significant share of that resource. And of course, we provide particularly good opportunities for floating offshore wind, especially suited, obviously, to deep waters. And that's why we already host the world's first commercial floating wind farm, Equinor's Hywind Scotland, and the world's largest floating wind farm, the Kincardine development, of course, off the coast of Aberdeenshire. And Crown Estate Scotland's current leasing round, the ScotWind process, is the most advanced opportunity for floating wind projects anywhere in the world. It's already attracted huge interest, 74 bids received for 15 sites. And after the results of the ScotWind bids are announced early in the new year, we'll then publish a route map for further licensing rounds. And by doing that, we hope to provide developers and investors with much more certainty about when further opportunities will become available. And the second point I want to highlight is that Scotland's potential for offshore wind perfectly complements our ambitions for hydrogen energy. We are already recognised internationally for our hydrogen demonstration projects, the hydrogen bus fleet in Aberdeen, the hydrogen heating network in Fife, for example. And we will shortly be publishing a new hydrogen action plan. Amongst other things, that will set out our aim to generate 5 gigawatts of renewable and low carbon hydrogen by 2030 and show that Scotland has the potential to produce and then export the lowest cost hydrogen in Europe. Of course, that's partly because green hydrogen requires 2 main inputs: access to low cost renewable electricity and a reliable supply of water. And I'm pleased to say Scotland has large quantities of both of these things. And that means that offshore wind, as well as being a really important vital sector in its own right, can also help us develop our hydrogen sector. In fact, it can help us meet our future demand for hydrogen and also provide a surplus for export, which is benefiting, of course, our domestic economy and playing such a vital role then in that just transition to net zero. And as we develop our hydrogen and offshore wind sectors, we will need to develop our supply chain, and that's the third area I want to touch on. And it's an area where, if I can be candid for a moment, perhaps uncharacteristically for a politician, we've not done as well as we could or should have done over the past decade. But it is also an area where I hope we are learning lessons and making progress so that we do perform much better in the future. Crown Estate Scotland has, for example, introduced the Supply Chain Development Statement, ensuring that supply chain details are made clearer to government, industry and the public. And we've also commissioned a strategic investment assessment through the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council. That has recommended developing a Scottish port cluster to help our ports develop the right infrastructure for supply chain manufacturers. I think it's worth reflecting that Scotland's oil and gas supply chain went from a standing start several decades ago to developing what is today a well-deserved international reputation. So it can be done. In Scotland, we have proven that that can be done. So what we want now is for our offshore wind supply chain to grow even more rapidly and replicate that success. To achieve that, we will draw on the skills and experience of the oil and gas sector, one of the biggest assets we have right now in making the transition in energy. I spoke earlier about the need for that transition to be just, and drawing on the oil and gas sector, the skills, the expertise, the infrastructure as we expand our offshore wind and our hydrogen sectors will be a crucial part of ensuring that the transition is just. After all, Scotland's offshore wind resources will last for as long as the wind blows. And in Scotland, I expect that to be for quite some considerable time. So we're going to need people to design, build and maintain our offshore wind farms. So if we support and do the right things to support our supply chain now, that is going to be a really valuable investment for our future, well into Scotland's future, helping to support good green jobs for now, but also for generations to come. The final point I want to make is that though Scotland has significant and very distinctive strengths, which we should absolutely maximise to the full, many of the challenges the sector faces are, of course, international ones. And that's why it is so good that we have guests here from other parts of the world, Brittany and California, for example. We have an agreement actually to work with California on tackling climate change. We're also working closely with France on joint research priorities for offshore wind and hydrogen supply chains. We want to develop further partnerships for the future with businesses, governments, organisations from around the world. So I really hope that an event like this one will encourage ideas, conversations, connections that will lead to those greater and deeper collaborations in the future. Above all, however, I hope that today's event will allow us to realistically see the challenges that offshore wind faces, but also grasp the scale of the opportunities that it offers us. As I said at the outset, we are in a city right now that feels like the capital of the world. Of course, Glaswegians always think this is the capital of the world, and there's nothing Glaswegians like more than being the centre of attention. But we are, and this is a serious point, and one we should reflect seriously on. We are not just part of a discussion right now, but we are playing host to discussions at this COP26 summit, which are seeking to deal with, grapple with, face up to the biggest challenge that the world faces. And this sector will be absolutely instrumental in developing and delivering the technologies which help us and the rest of the world to address that challenge and to move to net zero, to save this planet of ours for the generations that will come after us. So that is an enormous opportunity. It's also a very serious responsibility for all of us and for the offshore wind sector in particular. And it's one that we must seize and seize absolutely to the full. So I want to assure all of you today that the Scottish Government is focused on doing everything we can to help you seize those opportunities. And in doing so, to ensure that Scotland and this city, having led the world into the industrial age, in 100 years, 200 years from now, future generations will look back and see that Glasgow and Scotland played a powerful role in leading the world into the net zero age. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for all you are doing. And I and the Scottish Government look forward to working with you in the months and years ahead to make sure we fully seize the opportunities that lie before us. Thank you very much indeed.